This is track 3, which is titled Towards Carbon Neutral Cities. And we have 3 very good speakers this morning, and I will begin the session by introducing myself. My name is Bill Maybush. I'm with Turner Construction International, and I'm located in Doha, Qatar. Our final presentation is titled, What Do You Care What Other People Think? And this will be presented by Francesca Galeazzi. Francesca is with Arup, and she's located in Shanghai, and she is an architect and senior engineer working on environmental sustainability issues as a specialist. So please welcome Francesca.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me here to speak today, and to all of you delegates to come and listen to me. Today I have the hard task to stand for Gary Lawrence, that is the Arup Urban Strategies leader in Seattle, who unfortunately couldn't come here and deliver this presentation. So I've got a bit of a hard task today. As you can see from the title, I'm here to spark a little bit of a debate and provoke some reactions with you. And I'm not going to talk about lots of technical issues, because I'm sure my colleagues will talk about all of those. And I'm not going to cover a lot of projects that you might expect from somebody from Arup. But I like to talk about the big picture more and what is important. Sorry, I touched the wrong button. Why should people care about carbon neutrality? In fact, we're here today in this panel talking towards carbon neutral cities, but so far in our technical community, we haven't even reached a consensus on what carbon neutrality is. I've seen so many definitions being flying around, so carbon neutral, carbon zero is towards carbon zero. And if we don't even know what we're trying to achieve, why should people care about it? The problem is, in fact, people don't really care about sustainability. They have better things to care about. Half of the world's population is wondering where the next meal is going to come from. So why should they care about sustainability? The problem that I see and the thread that I would like to discuss with you today is that sustainability could become a means to solve people's problems and the issues, and is not an end into itself. Is a mean. It could be a tool to solve specific problems that people have, which could be the daily life, the well-being of the family. There could be the food or access to basic services. All of those problems could be solved if we looked holistically, bringing sustainability as a framework to solve the problems. But so far, I believe that sustainability hasn't been solved very well. And this is also one of the important messages that I'm going to try to illustrate in my presentation. And I'm going to bring some examples of what I believe why sustainability hasn't been solved very well. I like to look at different issues that illustrate this problem. Initially, for example, cities, there's a big debate going on at the moment whether cities are better than or worse than rural or suburban areas. In fact, as this morning David Nelson was saying in his presentation, cities have a higher carbon intensity. They produce more carbon. So if our issue was reducing carbon, we might think cities are bad, but actually pro capita, the carbon intensity is lower than rural areas, has mainly to do with transportation and commuting and delivering goods and services to rural communities. So actually, cities are not that bad. And given the mass flow of people from rural areas into cities, cities are going to pretty much play a fundamental role in reducing our carbon footprint, our carbon impact in the future. And to do that, we believe that cities maybe should be rethought drastically. And when I say that, I think about how we plan and how I build cities so that they are adaptable and flexible for future uses. I'm thinking in particular, when we design buildings, never to forget that actually buildings never exist in isolation. They're always part of a community. And they exist only successfully only if they completely integrated in the community. And another key important thing on cities is the notion of mixed use and gaining maximum benefits that you wouldn't have in most suburban areas, for example, in co-locating different uses in the same place. We've seen a lot of examples today of mixed-use developments, and they're extremely beneficial not just because of energy sharing potential that we all know about, but also because transportation issues and creating communities which are more lively, and just because of the mix of different occupants and users, passive surveillance by having 24-hour activities and so on. In particular, one example, I said I'm not going to bring examples, but I'll just bring in two, just to illustrate what I mean. About 4 years ago, I was responsible for developing the environmental sustainability strategies for Ctbuh City, which is a 1.4 million square meters mixed-use development in London. And the key word was literally a flexible and adaptable city. And in particular, this slide only illustrates the energy supply resilience that we were trying to build in the city. And we did that by having a robust network of energy infrastructure connected to a central CHP plant that was providing cooling, heating, and power to the city, where renewable energy could be incorporated in time. We know cities happen in time, and it's very difficult to plan from day one and say, well, this is going to be carbon neutral. You can set a framework to achieve that in time, say in 20 years. And that framework needs to be robust enough to allow, for example, for technology and renewables to be incorporated at a later stage, but also the framework needs to be flexible enough to move with time. And this is, time is really, really important when we discuss issues to do with urbanization and cities, because when I was developing Stratford, we were thinking we were the pioneers. It was, at least for the UK, it was a very innovative framework for a new urban development and setting standards 25% below regulations, I believe, in terms of energy saving, was considered pretty good. And a year later, it was like almost normal. Everybody was doing it. It just, the standards change very fast, and the bar, luckily, is raised constantly and very fast. So when we deal with issues of creating new cities and new communities, things change really fast. So you need to be able to link your targets and link your ideas and your aspirations with the fact that things are going to change pretty quickly. The issues. This slide in particular comes from Gary Lawrence, and he's collected in his huge experience as urban planner, especially was the senior, well, the city planner for Seattle before joining Arup. He's collected the big issues that matter to people by talking to them, by talking to communities, by talking to the government, by talking to the design community, to all of us. And I have to say that carbon and sustainability, yeah, appears in the list, but it's pretty down the line. And the most important thing that always came up first, in fact, is water, a reliable water supply, together with also energy, and reliable power supply is, of course, is a big issue for new development. And when I talk about water, I'm not talking about developing countries, I'm not talking about the issues that, for example, India might face, or Mumbai. California is about 20% oversubscribed to its water supply. And that means that the whole city is taking water resources from the countryside, and the agricultural productions need to move forward with new systems to be able to save energy to supply the cities that use so much water. So water, actually, we've seen water shortages around the world in our hot summers, is a big issue, and all the mobility and transport, food, gender issues. We're going to touch onto those later on. All of those issues, they could be tackled if we looked at them as part of solving the carbon issues, but only if we look at them together. And the idea that I'm trying to illustrate today is that although sustainability is not an abstract concept, if we look at ways of solving in the most sustainable way all of those issues, we will be helping people that are affected by those, that believe those are the big important problems in their lives, and at the same time we would solve the issues of going towards carbon neutrality. Another important issue to me, but also to Gary, who was putting this presentation together, although the majority of population in the world is female, cities usually are designed for men, and are designed by men for men, and they're full of testosterone, in fact. My question to us, to the design community, is that how could we positively respond to gender issues by design? And with this, I mean, how can we think of how can we incorporate the issues that matter to women and to families with children into the way we design buildings and cities? What about security? What about accessibility? What about space for kids? I mean, when we talk about our sustainable future, people usually say children are our most important asset for the future, but we keep on creating barriers in our urban spaces to stop them achieving a better life, right? So there's a bit of food for thought here. Environment. Only in the US, millions of dollars are spent every year trying to convince people to drive less. This message typically is based on scientific data about pollution and congestion, and pretty much telling people you should drive a bit less. At the same time, oil and car companies and the car industry have much more successful campaigns based on other issues. Usually, oil companies are based on security, and the car companies base their messages on better life, ambitious, status symbol, maybe a better sexual life, which is also a very good point of selling anything. And this brings me to think that maybe what we're doing wrong here, why people are so not interested in sustainability, is that we're not selling it very well. We sell it in a way that people, you should be scared of climate change, it's going to be really bad for you. And that way, doing that, people get completely disengaged and worried and just walk away and keep on doing the same things that they've done before. And we really can't afford that. Another big issue, health. 50% of world's deaths are caused by preventable chronic diseases. Heart disease and stroke, diabetes, lung diseases and cancer, and all of those are products of our modern lifestyles. The question I would like to throw to the design community is that can we design buildings and spaces that have a positive impact on those 50% deaths by chronic diseases? And by saying that is, when we design a building, why do we always hide the staircase somewhere where you can't see it, for example? Why, when I come to my headquarters in London of Arup, the first thing I see is the banks of lifts, beautiful and shiny, and the staircases are always hidden in the back. That really annoys me, because it's not just because we had a bad building, it's just because all buildings are designed by people that sometimes forget about how good it is to walk up, a couple of floors, and how good is that has an impact on people and on the perception of having healthier lifestyles and walking around, and maybe also talking to your neighbor while you go up on your floor. And it's not just about designing stairs. I mean, this is an example. What I like to see is maybe a design community that starts to understand that sustainability is not just environmental issues, it's not just about energy, is the fact that if we can reduce the huge amount of money spent to cure the 50% of people that are going to die of those diseases, and then take the money that we saved by making them having healthy lifestyles, then we could use the money in another better way, maybe to power our cities in a greener way. So that there's a lot of issues that are hidden behind, and a lot of us are not trained to see and are not able to see. Social equity. This brings me to a very important point, is the moral issue that I was kind of almost touching before. Should we care about these issues? I mean, of course we can go about doing the same thing over and over as we've done before, but as designers, should we base our designers on issues of justice, fairness, and poverty alleviation, for example? Is it our responsibility? Is it our responsibility to tell the client, you should do that, even if we know he's not interested? What do we have to lose? Is our choice, but is a way of maybe balancing the issues when we see a client. How do we balance the interest of the client to make as much money as possible against the priorities that the community might have and the effect that what we do might have on a community? So, I'm not suggesting any answers here, but more food for thought. Should we do that? Should we think that maybe a community that hasn't got really good transport infrastructure might be impoverished, even if it's not poor community, just because it would make it more difficult to go to work, for example? Resilience. That's another really hot topic, especially when we talk about climate change. And again, for example, transportation is a very big topic, very important topic in urban design and in planning for resilience for disasters. We saw, for example, how when Katrina struck, people couldn't escape fast enough, and that's why we had so many deaths in New Orleans. And we're seeing what a disaster is happening at the moment in Haiti, where people can't get delivered aid. Aid is not delivered to who needs it, just because transport hasn't been planned for disaster. At the same time, more than 50% of the US economy lays on the coastal zones, which would be affected by climate change, would be affected by sea rise and more severe storms. So is there any thought of that informs new planning? When we design back-to-back on a seaside, what infrastructure can we put in place to make sure that those communities are going to be resilient when climate change will strike? And moving people away from communities is never a solution, because I've heard a lot. Oh, well, that place is actually not secure, not safe. Let's move everybody out. And usually when you do that, you're going to touch vulnerable and poor communities, which of course is the worst thing you could do. And as we saw before on the project in Mumbai, in the slums, there's a lot of vitality and hidden economy that strives in those poor and vulnerable communities. And so the idea is, how do you make them more resilient when climate change will arrive? And here I'm talking about one project only, because I thought at least I have to bring an example and not just tell you abstract ideas. This is our school project. I've been involved in for the last 10 years. Natural local materials and vernacular construction techniques by using passive solar energy rather than active systems, so there's no maintenance, there's nobody that is in charge of replacing a bit when it goes wrong. So passive design, always the key. Water self-sufficient and use of vegetation, for example, to reduce the heat island effect, and also culturally appropriate to celebrate the culture and the tradition of the place by developing, designing, for example, a school building that celebrates the tradition, but in a positive contemporary way. It's just not looking back at how vernacular traditional architecture used to be, but is actually we're taking the traditional culture, the traditional design, and in a new contemporary way. And at the same time, the kids at the school learn about their own culture, the food, the language, as they wouldn't do otherwise in state schools, but they learn also English and computer and maths. And that's the idea of helping communities to be resilient also towards the cultural assault of the West, by not forgetting where they come from, not forgetting the language, not forgetting the traditions, but being able to stand in equality in the future, by being able to, for example, speak English in a better way or know about contemporary issues. So that's very, very quick chat about, about this project, unfortunately, for time restrictions. Another very important issue is governance. Overall, there's a belief, either within the design community or outside, that designers, engineers, and scientists can solve issues like sustainability or climate change. I think it's not. I think the issue is whether there is political will to solve those issues. And the sustainability is never a technical thing. It's never a technical problem. It's actually a political issue. It's economic and political. And as designers, and not politicians, as designers and planners and architects, the question for us is, how do we help our politicians to make the right decisions that they have to make? How do we help them to minimize the political risk? Because a politician would never take a decision to push sustainability in any aspect and get his career ruined at the next election. All politicians are always worried about getting re-elected, and we know that. How can we help them to give them a framework that is robust enough that next time the community is going to go, hey, politician, what did you do? He would say, I've done it because I believed that was the best thing to do for you. And this is a sustainability framework that I brought into the plan to bring in all issues of social, economic, and environmental sustainability. And I think when you start looking at that, when you start using our technical knowledge and our knowledge of how communities work, and our technical capacity of designing cities and buildings, and put it together in a way that you form a decision-making framework, that would give the strongest position for politicians to push sustainability through the designs. And I think that's really important, because governments have a fundamental role in making sure that sustainability will take place, it will actually happen in reality, not just in words. And I believe it's really important that we work a lot with our governments and our politicians, because everybody can do their bit, and it's great. I do my bit, you guys do your bit, but altogether we only do our little bit. Governments can push the big agenda. And this takes me towards my conclusions, because I heard the bell, almost. A couple of things for us designers. I'm talking a lot about thinking that there's a lot of designers, engineers, architects, and planners here in the audience, and students. We are very good at understanding things in depth, in detail. But I like to throw it out there. Let's try all together to look at things in breadth, in the big picture. Not a building, but a community, in the wider community, and how a city works. And the idea of time, over time, nothing stays as it is. The things that we know today are going to look different, and we're going to think of them differently tomorrow. And it's really important, and this comes into everything we do, that we think of how things are going to change in the future. And look for, when I'm saying at intersections, let's look for places where multiple solutions can be achieved with one criteria, for example, where by doing something you achieve multiple sustainability outcomes. Those are the issues to tackle. And finally, don't try to change what people care about. And I'll go back to the list of issues that we had initially. Instead, let's try to find out what they care about and then look for solutions to those issues that reduce the carbon impact of their problems. So, maybe this might mean transforming issues which can be very abstract to something really tangible that communities can relate to. For example, if you're a citizen in your community, what would it make you to stay in the community and fight for it rather than leaving and fleeing, going somewhere else? Would it be, I don't know, transport, healthcare, accessibility to services? Well, then let's look at how to develop the sustainability aspects of those problems and solve them in a low-carbon way. And just to close, Edward the bear, he knows only one way to coming down the stairs, and that's when the child drags him along and he bumps his head on every single step. As far as he knows, that's the only way to come down the stairs. But similarly, for us designers, we often think that there's only one way to do things. But deep inside, maybe we also know that there are other ways of doing things like the bear. And if only we could stop for a second and think. Thank you.